I've analyzed all production chains for profitability, and it turns out that many of them literally lose money. So which ones should you watch out for and which will lead you to riches? You'll find out in this video. Additionally, you'll also see a ranking of greenhouse crops and the profitability of honey production. But let's start at the beginning. What does best really mean? There are actually two rankings: the highest monthly income and the greatest profit with the least amount of work. For example, in the case of the sawmill, which production chain gives us the highest income from a single tree? At the end of the video, I'll select the best factories from a practical standpoint, adding one more important factor, but I'll talk about that later in the video. This is the last episode in the series where I analyze the economy. In the next video, I'll put this knowledge into practice and try to make $1 billion. So subscribe to make sure you don't miss it. And if anyone wants to appear in that video, join the Discord server. I'll share more information there. In the meantime, let's start with biogas plants, which deserve a separate ranking because we can't store energy. It's sold continuously and the rules aren't as straightforward as in other factories. That's why I reviewed all recipes in all biogas plants, analyzing how much they process and earn over 12 months. There were slight fluctuations in monthly profits, but I checked it several times, and there's no rule about earning the most in one month and the least in another, as is often the case with other products. Therefore, the monthly income I'll be sharing is averaged over the year and also accounts for selling digestate at the highest price. So let's see the ranking of monthly income for all biogas plants. At the very bottom of the table is the small biogas plant processing sugar beets, specifically sugar beet cut. Interestingly, not all production chains from the small biogas plant are at the bottom of the ranking, as silage in the small plant is actually ranked higher than sugar beets in the large biogas plant. As we move higher, I don't think there are any surprises, since the production chain with silage in the largest biogas plant takes first place. By largest, I mean the one you can buy on the map, not build. The others, large, small and medium, are the buildable ones. Additionally, for those who haven't seen the previous videos in this series, all product prices reflect the highest prices I encountered during extensive testing. However, the ranking based on monthly income should really be seen as a curiosity because it has nothing to do with profitability. On the other hand, it does indicate how quickly such an investment pays off, so it provides some theoretical insight. The more important aspect to consider is actual profit. For silage and sugar beets, that's the profit per hectare, while for manure and slurry, it's something we'll discuss shortly, as I have some very interesting information and a trick to share, something not everyone might know. But let's start with sugar beets, which, when sold directly, bring over 40,000 per hectare. However, in this case, the sugar beets need to be cut first, which is very time consuming. So let's take a closer look at how profitable this business really is. In the case of the largest biogas plant, we earn 40% more than by selling them directly. On the other hand, for the smallest biogas plant, the profit is so small that, in my opinion, spending money on its construction and the hassle of cutting the sugar beets isn't worth it. Now, let's take a look at silage, specifically corn silage, which generates over 31,000 per hectare. This situation is much more interesting because in almost every biogas plant, we earn nearly twice as much as by selling silage directly. And in the largest biogas plant, it's nearly 2.5 times more. In every case, it makes perfect sense, as there are no additional processes like with beets. You simply pour it in and multiply your earnings. To wrap up the topic of biogas plants, I mentioned earlier that I have an interesting piece of information that not everyone may know. Namely, both slurry and manure can be purchased. Honestly, I only discovered this while making this video. I'd heard something about it before but never actually checked. The purchase prices of both manure and slurry fluctuate. However, the price chart only shows fluctuations for sales, so I averaged the results from my tests, which yielded around 65 per 1,000 liters in both cases. Of course, it doesn't make sense to buy and resell them as the sale price is lower, but take a look at this ranking. By purchasing manure or slurry and processing it into energy in the largest biogas plant, you multiply your money over 8 times. So this is a very intriguing option, though you won't make millions quickly. The monthly profit from the largest biogas plant processing manure or slurry is around 25,000. So while it's profitable, it won't make you a millionaire overnight. I believe I've covered the topic of biogas plants 100%. Now it's time to move on to something I touched on in one of my recent videos, where I explored the easiest ways to make money. This of course brings us to greenhouses, which are practically money generators. workers. Water can be obtained for free, and you can skip loading pallets by setting production to automatic sale. However, the real question everyone asks is what to grow to maximize profit. You should definitely avoid growing Napa cabbage, as the profit isn't very impressive. The same goes for mushrooms. Without a doubt, lettuce is the best choice for greenhouse crops. Compared to tomatoes, which rank second, lettuce brings nearly double the profit. I think there's no need to elaborate further on greenhouses. I discussed this topic in more detail in the aforementioned video, where I tested the practice. For those interested, I encourage you to catch up on it. In the meantime, before diving into the essence, the factory ranking, let's touch on honey production, focusing exclusively on profitability. I conducted tests over several years. Why several years? Because I was surprised to find that from December to February, bees don't produce honey. Initially, I thought this was due to a game bug, but it appears to be part of the game's mechanics. Moreover, I suspect this might reflect reality. If anyone is involved in beekeeping in real life, feel free to share if this is indeed true. In terms of profitability, a large beehive produces 284 liters of honey annually. The highest price I encountered was over 2,000 per 1,000 liters, meaning the annual income from one hive exceeds 570. I consider this a moderately profitable option, as the return on investment for such a hive takes some time, unless the honey is needed for other production chains. Speaking of production chains, it's worth singling out factories that process wood. This is primarily because in this case, profitability is calculated based on earnings from a single tree, rather than per hectare. Before discussing the earnings from a single tree, let's look at what we might call the return on investment ranking, or monthly income. Naturally, wherever wood chips were produced, I also included their sale at the highest prices. It's worth noting that in this ranking, as well as all subsequent ones, I only considered the largest factories. The smaller ones used the same recipes, but with reduced proportions. At the bottom of the table are furniture made from wood, slightly higher are those made from planks. The top of the table features planks followed by prefabricated walls, and at the very top, rolls of paper. However, as I mentioned earlier, this ranking doesn't tell us much. So let's move on to specifics. The earnings from a single tree. In this case, we're talking about lodgepole pine, which provides approximately 5,300 liters of wood for the factory. That's the basis for my calculations. For products that don't rely directly on wood, such as planks, I calculated how many planks could be produced from 5,300 liters and then worked from there. Either way, the final result is earnings from a single tree, regardless of the number of intermediate processes. This leads us to a fascinating conclusion. The ranking of earnings from a single tree almost completely overturns the previous monthly income ranking. Products that offered the highest monthly income turn out to be less profitable from the perspective of a single tree. What's more, it turns out that furniture made directly from wood yields the highest profit per tree. It seems almost impossible, doesn't it? And yet, furniture made from raw wood is more profitable than furniture made from planks, despite the additional step of producing the planks first. That's why I decided to test it in practice to ensure no one thinks I made it up, and I admit I was curious myself, and the results surprised me. I built a factory and threw in an entire tree along with its leaves. If you want to know why, check out the previous episode, where I tested the profitability of forestry. From this tree, I got almost 5,300 liters of material, and then I sped up time until the entire tree was processed into furniture. I ended up with 8 full pallets plus 1 additional pallet, and 1 liter still left in the factory because there was no room. I sped up time again to sell the furniture at the highest price, as that was taken into account in the ranking. Then I loaded the pallets onto a trailer and set off. Ladies and gentlemen, to my surprise, I indeed earned as much as I had previously calculated, though it was 100 less. The price I used in the calculations was measured over several years, so it could have been better than the one I encountered during this test. Nevertheless, everything matched perfectly. To sum up the topic of wooden factories, I would still put the production of bathtubs from planks in the first place, because the profit from one tree is almost the same as the monthly profit. So we process 1 tree per month. However, in the case of furniture made directly from wood, processing 1 tree takes 5 months. So it's also worth considering this aspect. On the other hand, producing bathtubs requires the planks to be made first. So the choice is up to you. Write your thoughts on the subject in the comments about which factory you would choose. And now we move on to the essence of this episode, which is the biggest ranking with as many as 64 positions. Since I want to show you both the ranking of monthly earnings and earnings per hectare wherever possible, I decided to present the top 10 best and 10 worst production chains so as not to bore you all. If anyone wants to see the full ranking, I will upload it to Discord in about a week, and the link is of course in the description. Let's start with the ranking of the 10 factories earning the most monthly. The list begins with Asian soup, both the one produced using rice flour and the one using wheat flour, as the recipe is the same. Next is a bag of rice followed by cereal, both the chocolate and raisin varieties. The podium is opened by fabric and then clothes, both those made from cotton fabric and those from wool fabric. Let's also see what the bottom 10 of this ranking looks like. The least will earn monthly is from producing buffalo milk butter. Then we have cake, both the one made with rice flour and the regular one. Interestingly, it requires the most ingredients, but the monthly profit is the smallest. However, as I mentioned more than once in this video, monthly profit has little significance. Let's look at earnings per hectare, which will show us the real profitability. Here I have a few notes. First, the yield per hectare is taken from previous episodes, both for crops and animals. That's why it was calculated then. Second, remember that not all production chains can be converted into per hectare earnings. For example, those involving greenhouse crops or honey. Keep in mind that not all factories are included. Let's start with the bottom 10, as I discovered something incredibly interesting here. Namely, grape juice is in the last place, followed by raisins. I'll explain more about this, but let's go through the ranking first. I focused on raisins and grapes, and we also need to add rice bags to this group because with these production chains, we're literally losing money. The profit from selling grapes or rice directly is higher, and I decided to verify this in practice using grape juice as an example. I loaded 1,000 liters of grapes into the factory and waited for the juice to be produced. From the entire batch, I got just over 300 liters, and since a pallet forms at 1,000 liters, I used the command to spawn a pallet with such contents. I then advanced time to the month when grape juice prices were highest and sold it for 946. Next, I advanced to the month when grape prices were highest and sold 1,000 liters, the same amount I had input into the factory. Selling the grapes directly earned me 1,273, which is over 300 more. This seems almost laughable and I still can't believe it. Factories actually lose us money, but that's the reality. Let me know what you think in the comments. And now it's time for what is almost the most important ranking. Why almost? I'll explain in a moment, but first let's look at the 10 biggest earnings per hectare. The ranking starts with chips made using sunflower oil, followed by a huge 50% leap to cotton rope, and then the profits only climb higher until we reach the podium. Opening the top 3 are clothes made from wool fabrics, followed by buffalo milk butter, and at the very top, bottled goat milk. Alright, so why do I think this still wasn't the most important ranking, and what factor did I mention at the start of the video? To identify the best factory, we also need to consider how many months it takes to process that hectare. For example, with goat milk, we're talking about a hectare of grass processed by goats into milk, which is then bottled. Producing bottled milk from a hectare takes almost 30 months. The monthly profit from this factory is just under 12,000. For the second place factory, it's more than double that. But don't worry, I've prepared a tier list for you as a summary of this series, factoring in time and other practical aspects such as workload. In this tier list, I considered the best factories from the entire episode. So let's dive into the essence of this. To start, very good profit, but long term, the production of buffalo milk butter. A plus is that buffaloes don't require a lot of work apart from mixing feed. Unlike with goats, you don't have to deal with pallets, which is a definite advantage. Additionally, making butter earns you over 4 times more than selling the milk directly. However, the 66 months required for a return puts this factory in the last position on the best of the best ranking as just an honorable mention. Processing purchased slurry and manure in a biogas plant is an interesting way to make easy money. However, buying a biogas plant itself is a huge expense that takes a long time to pay off. That's why I rank this option slightly higher than butter production, because all you really need to do is transport products from one place to another. Greenhouses have a simple formula, so they can, in a sense, be treated like factories that turn water into vegetables. The best option is to produce lettuce. biogas as it offers the highest profit. The only thing you need to do is supply water, which is free. What's more, you can set the tank to automatically refill the water, making this option even more appealing. However, the monthly profit compared to other factories isn't very impressive. That's why I rank greenhouses below the podium. Though this is a debatable point, they could arguably be placed higher. The largest biogas plant can process more than a hectare of corn silage in just 1 month, generating over 110,000 in profit, which is impressive. However, preparing silage takes a lot of time, especially when it comes to corn. Transporting and compacting can't be done by workers. You can also make silage from grass bales, but here too workers won't operate the baler for you. So while this isn't an ideal solution, silage processed in a biogas plant earns a spot on the podium, tied with wool fabric production. When it comes to fabrics, you first need to raise sheep, which takes time, but you're looking at a profit of around 340,000 per hectare. For comparison, selling the wool alone gives over 100,000 less. The catch is that the fabric factory processes 1 hectare in 20 days, which is fairly long, but we're still talking about massive profits from just 1 hectare of land. Interestingly, building a clothing factory is almost not worth it. The profit increase is just 10,000. Sure, 1 hectare is processed in under 4 days, but does it make sense? Let me know in the comments what you think. What definitely makes sense is producing bathtubs from planks. In 2 days, 1 tree can be turned into planks, and then in 1 day, those planks can be turned into bathtubs. From a single tree, you earn over 24,000, which seems like a staggering amount and a very appealing option. However, forestry is very time consuming, and hiring workers for forestry tasks is simply not an option. That's why I placed this in second place because, ladies and gentlemen, in my opinion, the title of the best factory in Farming Simulator 25 goes to chips, made using sunflower oil. In terms of profit per hectare, it's just under 100,000. However, processing less than a hectare of potatoes with sunflower oil takes less than 5 months. This means that one factory can earn over $230,000 per year. To achieve this, you only need to harvest about 2.5 hectares of sunflowers and potatoes combined. Theoretically, gathering that many potatoes might seem problematic, especially in terms of storage. But here's where I'll surprise you. The factory storage can hold up to 240,000 liters, enough to last an entire year of production with plenty of surplus left over. In my opinion, this is a brilliant option. The only downside is the initial cost of building the factory and the long harvest time for potatoes. However, everything can be automated by hiring workers, so working on large areas shouldn't be an issue. Let me know in the comments what you would change on this list. And remember, if you want to play together with me and try to make $1 billion, join my Discord, where I'll share more details. Subscribe if you enjoyed the video. I've put countless hours of work into this video and the entire series. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. See you soon!